Yeah, our date is September 24th, 2011, and we're at the Military Museums. And two interviewers here are myself, James Baldwin, and Karen Cooner. And we're interested in interviewing Vern Harvey. Vernon Harvey is his formal name. So Vernon, could you give us your full name, birth date, and what unit you served with?
My full name is Vernon Harold Harvey. My birth date was March 16, 1922, and I served for 3 years in the Canadian Merchant Navy.
And so when did you enlist, and why did you enlist?
I enlisted I put my first application in December 1942, and I was accepted in January 1943 in the Merchant Navy. The reason I joined in the Merchant Navy was that I had graduated from high school, and my father, who had served 3 years in the First World War, was fully convinced we were going to win this war, and he wanted me to get started in some kind of a profession before I joined any organization. He said he didn't care which I joined, but get some start. So we arranged that I would go to Toronto, and I would take a course in commercial radio operating. I graduated from that course in December 1942, and I went to the Air Force again, and they said, "Oh, that's wonderful, you're a commercial radio operator. What we'll do is send you to Kingston, or close to Kingston, Ontario, and make an instructor out of you for wireless air gunners." So I didn't like that idea, and at the same time a gentleman came up from Ottawa talking about the Merchant Navy. I needed no training. I was fully trained, and I would start service immediately. So I joined them, put in an application for the Merchant Navy, and was accepted in January 1943. And by March 1943, I had signed on the SS Algonquin Park, and I was on my way.
So Vern, can you just clarify, you're with going to kind of a private school situation,
Yes.
And then so why did you end up going radio operator, and why did you end up going merchant marine?
Well, I was always interested in radio. When I was a kid, I built crystal sets and so on, and when my father suggested I choose a career, I thought, well, radio would be it. And actually, in those days, radio was electronics today. And so we chose to go to Toronto, to the Radio College of Canada, and I was accepted, and my father loaned me the money to go to school, and I graduated in December 1942 as a commercial radio operator.
And what's your technology you're using in your training? What are they having you train on?
The technology was basically a technology about building transmitters and receivers, and looking after them, maintaining them, and so on. And of course, we're learning the Morse code. We had to learn the Morse code, and in order to get a license, I had to be proficient in the Morse code, the receiving and sending at 20 words a minute.
So then, like, what's your training for the Merchant Marine, or how do you sign up for the Merchant Marine? How do you do that?
The Merchant Marine happened to have contact with the Radio College of Canada, and they knew who was graduating, and of course they wanted commercial radio operators on every ship that sailed, because every ship that sailed had a commercial radio station aboard it, and it was a registered station. In the case of the Algonquin Park, it was registered, and it had its own call sign, and we were in charge of that radio station.
In general, this would have been in code. Would this all been done in my codes, and would you have code books?
I didn't. I had. Oh yes, you mean the messages were
yes.
in plain English? That's true. They were coded. As a matter of fact, the code was received in a number of five-letter groups of numbers. That's the way we received the message. Then we had a code book, which transferred those five-letter groups to phrases. And then we put those together afterwards to get the message.
And how, I know it's hard because over your voyages it might have changed, but how often would they change your code books then?
I can't tell you exactly, but periodically we did get a new code book if we got back in.
Okay.
But they overlapped for a period always. When they changed one, the new one and the old one would be used at the same time.
Was there a certain...
everybody, the station's headquarters would know what code book we had at sea.
Was there a certain procedure if you were going to be boarded or attacked of what to do with the code books?
Throw them overboard.
Okay.
That was our first duty.
Okay. So can you describe your training in the Merchant Marine, or where you went?
I wasn't trained in the Merchant Marine. I was trained when I went into the Merchant Marine, and I immediately went to sea. All my training was done personally and paid for by myself.
And do you remember what base or what location your ship, like you got on your ship, the Algonquin?
The ship was built outside of Montreal, and it sailed from Montreal. The Algonquin Park was about the 6th or 7th ship that was built of that fleet of park ships.
Do you remember the first time that you're on there, what's the age range or makeup of the crew by their nationality and their ages? Do you remember anything about that?
Well, the captain was in his 50s, and the officer crew, I would say, on the average would be in the 30s. And all the deck officers and the engineering officers had to serve their time, of course, to get to where they were. And of course, in our case, there was 3 radio operators aboard, and we all spent time in private schools getting our license. And I guess the average age would be in the early 30s, because the black gang, as we call the engine room group, was anywhere from 17, 18 years old to 50. You know, there was firemen down there who had been firemen all their life. And so that would be somewhere in that. And as far as the deck crew was concerned, there again, the bosun who was in charge of the deck crew would probably be a man in his early 50s. And the deck crew themselves would be anywhere from 17, 18 years old to 30 or 40.
Could you describe briefly a Peggy? You talked about what a Peggy was.
A Peggy was part of the staff of the serving group. That there was a chief, there was an officer in charge of the galley and the dining areas for the officers, and the food to be delivered to the back aft to the crew, and they called those deck Peggies or officers' Peggies or whatever, and they were usually kids as young as 15 sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested, was the Algonquin Park the only ship that you served on?
No, I served on 3 ships.
On 3 ships.
Yeah.
Were each of those ships designed as and built as merchant navy ships?
They were all park ships, yes, merchant navy park ships. Yeah, there was 2 classes primarily. There was the 10,000 tonners, which was the majority of the ships, and then there was a smaller ship used for shorter runs, a 4,700 ton ship. I served in 2 10,000 tonners and in a 4,700 ton.
And again, this might change depending on your voyage, and we want to get into the voyages in a minute. But overall, one of the questions we were interested in were how the ships were armed, or did they have guns on them or defensive measures?
They became better armed as the war progressed, and when we first went to sea on the Algonquin Park, we had a machine gun up on what we called Monkey Island. That was above the bridge, and a lookout area, and we had a machine gun up there that always jammed after 3 or 4 shells. It was a Lewis machine gun.
Oh, yeah.
And then back aft, we had a 3-inch heavy artillery piece of goods, and it was built for surface targets only. You couldn't get the thing high enough to use it as an anti-aircraft gun, and it was it was just aimed behind the ship and about a 40-degree angle, I guess, to either side. And of course, when a submarine was submerged, there was no target there anyway, and we couldn't shoot an aircraft. And it had so much paint on that we had DEMS crew gunners. We had a few gunners who were called defensively equipped merchant ships, and they called them DEMS gunners. And there was, I think, 3 of them aboard the ship. So the rest of the gun crew was made up of ship's crew. And as a matter of fact, on that first trip that we made, I was chosen to be one of the gun, because I was 3rd radio officer. There was not much for me to do in case of being attacked, so I was put on the gun back aft, and I didn't have any training on it. I got a half a day's training actually from Montreal, and so that was we used that gun, and it was one that had the DEMS gunners themselves tried to put it into shape when it was put aboard our ship, and they said it had enough paint on it for between the 2 wars somewhere in a park. And that was the gun. But they made it pretty good, pretty operational. But you had to have a submarine on the surface in order to have something to shoot at. So we didn't use it too often.
So later on, did you get a little bit better defenses
Later
on the
on,
Algonquin?
we got a better. We went to. As a matter of fact, we on our first trip on our way home, went into Bombay. And when we were there, a British raft came alongside of us, and the crew swarmed aboard the ship, took the 3-inch gun off, and brought in a 4-inch gun, brand new, had never been used. And that, when we had that installed, I went up and looked at it, and there was a tag on the gun, made by Massey Harris in Brantford, Ontario. And had never been used. It had been taken out there in a cargo, instead of putting it on our ship right off the bat, and went over there in a cargo, completely new, had never been used until it got aboard our ship. Now that was a much better gun. It was a more efficient gun. It was used for surface or aircraft, so we could, you could swing the thing high and shoot at aircraft. So every time we had an air attack, we were quite happy because we could shoot back. Because actually you couldn't shoot at a submerged submarine.
How often did you encounter the enemy?
Oh, I couldn't give you any names any times, but periodically, like when we got into the Mediterranean, we had some aircraft there. Later on, there was aircraft came out from France, and it wasn't until after the Germans took over that area that we got air attacks sometimes. And sometimes we would have, like for instance, in the Mediterranean, we'd have a reconnaissance aircraft over us most of the time. And
Did you ever encounter the Japanese?
yeah. Not too often. The Japanese didn't come out with aircraft. We did encounter them.
So did you eventually get other anti-submarine equipment or any like anti-aircraft guns?
We eventually got a couple of Oerlikons, 50mm Oerlikon guns. We got one on each side of the ship, and they were great guns. Wonderful guns for anti-aircraft.
Is there any anti-submarine booms or anything that were off the ship?
Well, if you saw a picture of that,
Yeah.
of the Algonquin Park, if you see what looks like a trail on either side of the ship, that's anti-submarine nets. They're nets that are lowered, and when they lower those nets, they're anti-torpedo. The torpedo hits those nets first. Now it might explode, but it's far enough from the ship that it wouldn't sink the ship.
Do you remember about what year you would have got those on the ship?
On the Algonquin Park, we got them in 1943.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So can we take you into describing your first voyage and your locations and where you went? You did that really well before, so
I can usually give you some information on that.
Yeah.
And it was in March 1943 that we left Montreal. And we were loaded with a cargo for the base, it was for the 14th Army in Burma. And so we went from Montreal to Quebec City on our own. And the ship had local people aboard just checking the engines and so on. We got to Quebec City, got rid of all those. They left us, and then they formed a convoy just outside of Quebec City because some German U-boats in the late 1942 had got into the area there, the St. Lawrence, and so they formed a convoy. That was our first convoy, and we sailed to Nova Scotia in convoy. Then we got into Halifax, and there we got our final sailing orders. And because the Germans were in charge of the North African area, we could not go to Burma by the Mediterranean, so they told us to go down the east coast of the United States, and that was one of their happy hunting grounds at that time. And we went down there, and the United States never had any blackouts. So we at night, the whole coast of the United States was wide open and lit up. And the German submarines, you could just set off the shore and watch a ship going by and let them have it. So we went down there, and what the captain did, without orders from anybody, at night he would go into a little gulf or something and sit there until morning. And we got down there, and we went down to the Panama Canal.
can I clarify something just there, Vern? So the convoy you're in convoy going down the coast? Now you're not, okay.
No escorts whatsoever.
Okay.
We're on our own. So we went down to the Panama Canal, went through the Panama Canal, and across the Pacific. Now our initial target when we left the Panama Canal was to go to New Zealand. So we went to Christchurch, New Zealand, all on our own, absolutely by ourselves. We never saw an escort from the time we left until we got there. And we did get, I was on watch one morning. We were about halfway to New Zealand, somewhere in there, and I don't know the exact location. I couldn't tell you that now. But anyway, I got a message. Now the wartime call sign of the Algonquin Park was ZL4AL, and I was listening to the 500 kilocycle band on the which we watched on the ship, and I heard ZL4AL coming over. ZL4AL, and there was a message from the headquarters of the British Admiralty in England for our ship, telling us that there was Japanese ships ahead of us, or in a position. It turned out to be ahead of us, but it was in a certain position there. They gave the position. I went out, put it on the chart, and there it was, straight directly ahead of us, about 12 hours ahead of us. So we called the captain up, and I was pretty much a rookie at that time. And so the captain looked at it. He came up, and he was one of these gentlemen that had a pipe in his mouth, and it was one of those pipes that rested on his chin. You know, it was went right down and rested his chin, and he looked at it, and he turned to me and he said, "Sparks, what was the time of origin of that message?" Well, I hadn't even looked at it because I had never thought of that. So I had to go back in the Radio Shack and checked out, and it was about 12 hours prior to my receiving it. That was the origin, the time of origin of that message. So he looked back at the chart and he said, "Well, we're about 12 hours from that spot now." So he said, if they were there 12 hours ago and they came this way, we'd be at the bottom of the ocean by now. So he said, if it went any other direction, chances are we wouldn't see it and see them. And so he turned to the third mate who was in charge of the deck at the bridge at that point, and he said, "Same course, same speed, double all the lookouts, and let me know if you see anything." He turned on his heel and went back down to his cabin. So I realized right there why I was a third radio operator and he was the captain. And we went on that basis, and we never did see them. I'm here. We got to New Zealand, and then we called in there, of course, for fuel, and we were there for a while. And then we went south of Australia, and then up to the Indian Ocean area. And again, all by ourselves. We had no escorts whatsoever. And we went through there to Ceylon. And we finally got a little convoy from Ceylon to Calcutta. And we arrived in Calcutta with our full cargo.
And you said that was a cargo destined for Burma.
It was destined for the Burmese, the 14th Army and British Army. And
But you didn't take it to Burma.
oh no, we couldn't. There was no port there that we could unload it.
Oh, they dropped supplies by air.
Yeah. Or the roads. Yeah.
There was aircraft there that did drop supplies, but there was also surface ways of getting it there.
You said on what you were carrying military equipment. Do you remember, like, were there jeeps on the deck, or did you have planes on the deck, or anything like that?
In that case, I'll tell you one thing we did have that you may be interested in, is on the deck of that ship was a Japanese fishing boat from the west coast. You have heard the stories about them taking the boats from the Japanese fishermen in the west coast. Well, we took one of those ships to Burma, or to Calcutta, and it was sent over to Burma, used as a river patrol boat.
Interesting.
And so we had jeeps, and we had other carriers, and we had ammunition and guns, and so on. We had a tremendous amount of guns. I remember talking to one of the veterans of the 14th Army, and he said when they went over there first, he went into the jungle carrying a rifle. And of course they had trouble if they saw anybody or saw a group of Japanese. They had trouble with their rifles trying to get ready to fire a shot at them, you know. And they had Bren guns and Sten guns. And the Sten gun was the better one because you didn't need to fire that. You just took it up in your hands and fired at the target, and it had enough shells that you could cover a pretty good area and get somebody. And this gentleman was telling me about being in Burma with rifles, and Slim came along with a whole bunch of Sten guns. And I was thinking at the time, maybe we took them out, you know, who knows?
Two questions on this voyage. Can you remember approximately what your shifts, or what was a typical day for you? A typical day, like what time you got up and...
Well, we had continuous watch aboard the ship. Like we had, to give you an example, there were 3 radio officers aboard the ship. Each radio officer stood 2 watches, 4-hour watches. That meant that the 3 of us covered 24 hours. There was always somebody on watch. So we had a 4-hour watch, and then we were off, and then again, like for instance, if you were 12 to 4, for instance, you were at 12 to 4 At noon you went on, and then at night at 12 to 4 a.m. you were on watch.
And so what was
the same thing with the mates? There were 3 mates, navigating officers, and they did the same thing. Engineering group was the same.
Could you tell us about, obviously the conditions must have got hotter, I'm assuming, like weather conditions or storms, or in this voyage, do you remember anything that was
We had a little bit of everything. Yeah, we had hot weather, and don't forget, we had to be blacked out at night. We couldn't have any portholes open at night, so we were blacked out completely. And so it got pretty hot at night particularly.
Did you encounter some large storms?
Yes, we did. Yeah. You know, we hear about these storms coming up the east coast of North America now. We never thought of those coming up to North America in the days we were out there in the Atlantic. But I had many storms that coming in through there in the Atlantic, and we went into them. But sometimes we had this. We had a convoy, and they just released the convoy and said, we'll meet somewhere in the Canary Islands or whatever. And everybody was on his own after that. And we had a pretty good reputation in that regard on our part ship, because we were, in a lot of cases, we sailed in convoys with Liberty ships, which were all welded hulls and so on. And there'd be Liberty ships with water flooding the holds and flooding the kitchen and the various rooms on deck and so on. And they had all kinds of troubles and dropped out of the convoys and so on. But our old part ships, which were riveted hulls and so on, we used to always be there at the assembly point.
Were you always, you're on a coal ship, so are you always picking up coal at ports, or ever at sea? Do you ever do it at sea, or is it always?
No, it's always at ports.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were able to go from the Panama Canal all the way to Christchurch on with just straight coal.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you think back, Vern, about it's a long time ago, but what were your attitudes towards the Japanese? Like, they talk about, is there hatred, is there whatever? Like, do you remember what you kind of thought about who was going to win the war, about the Japanese enemy?
We heard all the same stories that you've heard about, so we were just as afraid of getting captured by them as you can understand. We didn't like the idea at all.
Okay.
And we didn't like we knew very well that if you're in a lifeboat, the chances of survival were pretty slim. Because we did, as a matter of fact, we did encounter a lifeboat in the Arabian Sea. That the ship had been torpedoed and sunk. The lifeboat was still floating, and everybody in it was dead.
Oh. Sorry, and this is on the same. Is this on the same voyage, or is that?
Oh, this was on a later voyage.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll come back to that. That's. So you unload in Calcutta. Do you have any images or memories of Calcutta, of wartime Calcutta?
Oh yes. I don't know just how to describe anything, but it was a typical port city under wartime conditions.
And would say in the port would be like there would be ships from wherever. What kinds of ships would be in the port there?
There would be ships from all the United Nations countries that were involved. As a matter of fact, there were Swedish ships there. I remember British ships there, and I saw a couple of Australian ships there. Can't recall any others myself, but...
Did you ever have any other nationalities of crew on your ships that you served?
Occasionally, some members. If we had people that had to leave the ship for sickness or something like that, Or that case where you saw in the Slade that went to jail. When Slade went to jail, we had to find another fireman, and in that case, we got a British fireman.
That was in Calcutta, right?
That was in Calcutta. Now that British fireman was what they called a DBS, distressed British seaman. His British ship had been torpedoed, and he had survived, and he was waiting for another ship in Calcutta. So he came aboard and served as part of the crew, and I don't know when he ever got back to England, but we got back to Canada, and he left the ship in Canada, hoping to get a ship back to England, which he probably did.
Did you ever, were you ever aware of post-traumatic stress with some of these guys?
Never heard of it. Never heard of it.
So can you describe your voyage back? Do you pick up cargo or anything in Calcutta?
Yes, we picked up cargo. On that particular voyage, we picked up cargo. It was bales of hemp we picked up, and of course we never had any plastic ropes in those days, and the ships were using a lot of ropes and so on. They were very much in demand as a wartime product. And so we took the hemp back to England. Now what we did is we from Calcutta, we went around the coast to various ships like Madras and so on, and picked up that cargo of hemp. And the last port we called in India was Bombay. Now by that time the Germans had been defeated in the Mediterranean. So what we did is went across to the Red Sea by ourselves, and the biggest danger there was Japanese, and the Red Sea was a pretty safe area. Could keep them out there from both sides, and so we went up the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, to the Suez Canal, and then across the Mediterranean in a convoy. We finally got into a convoy.
Was that the canal? At the canal you picked up a convoy?
Suez Canal. We got into a British escorts convoy, and they took us to Gibraltar. Then from Gibraltar we went up to England. And at that time, our voyage to England was always around the west coast of India and back down into a British port. We didn't go through the Irish Sea, in between Ireland and England. That was
okay.
all
Mined
and
Yeah.
so on.
Were you under, once you got into the Mediterranean, were you under any attack or observation on that trip, do you think?
Yes, we did. We didn't lose any ships, as a matter of fact, but we had some air attacks from the north, from German planes, and we didn't lose any ships. It was mostly air attack. There was a couple of submarine scares, but they were not too bad. They didn't have any wolf packs or anything in the Mediterranean, so we had no problems. And the first time up to Britain, around the west coast of Ireland, it wasn't bad at all. It wasn't too bad. They hadn't taken over France at that time, so it wasn't too bad going to England that way.
Okay.
But we were under air attack in the Mediterranean pretty well every evening, and then we had a reconnaissance plane over us most of the time.
Were you always on pins and needles?
Oh, I guess you could call it that, but we knew we were going to be subject to an air attack in the evening, and everybody was ready for that, because the reconnaissance plane was over us all day long. And there was only one time we had any relief from that, as we were between Algiers and Gibraltar, I guess it'd be. And there was a number of passenger ships carrying troops coming from Gibraltar east. And there was the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth, and there was a couple of other ones they couldn't identify. And they were traveling at pretty good speed. And as a matter of fact, they were escorted by several destroyers, and the destroyers weren't, you know, when our convoys at 10 knots, the destroyers would go this way and that way and over here and back there and up front and all over. These ones, the destroyers were just going straight ahead beside the ships. Well, that reconnaissance plane sure left us when we met those guys. And that night, I could hear on the radio, red warnings all over the place behind us, but nobody attacked us that night.
I was going to ask you, what would be some typical messages that you would be dealing with, say at night or even during the day? Like, is it, what would be the tip? Like, are they from the leader of the convoy? Are they from?
No, from the leader of the convoy, there was definite silence, radio silence in the convoy at all times. The leader of the convoy used all his lights, just get messages back and forth. Now sometimes they would get messages that we wouldn't hear. They'd have particular frequencies assigned to the commodore of the convoy, and he'd get messages, and he would send back by all his light to the ships what was going on. But we didn't get too much. But we did have. What they had was from the headquarters of the British Admiralty, usually, BAM's messages, we called it, British Armed Merchant Ship. And that took place twice every hour and at a predetermined time. And that there would be messages on that for various ships and for various convoys. And we would always listen to those ones. Now those messages would come from our convoy, or to our convoy and 3 or 4 other convoys somewhere else. So we didn't always have the messages for ourselves. We just copied the messages, and if they were not for us, we sort of ignored them.
So where do you arrive in England to unload your hemp? Like, so
Yeah.
do you remember where you landed in England or port?
We were up in Scotland, up in Scotland.
Oh. And then is your second voyage?
The second voyage was out from there straight back over to Canada. That was the end of our voyage.
Okay. And
Which route did you take then? Just straight?
Across the Atlantic.
Are you in a convoy then?
a convoy, yeah.
And are you any cargo you're taking, or?
All we had was some Scotch whiskey and some mail.
Did you ever carry troops?
No, we didn't carry troops. We were a freighter only. Like the ships, like the Queen Mary's, the Queen Elizabeth's, and the various other passenger ships were all the troop ships.
You didn't ever pick up wounded trips coming back from Burma or anything like that?
No, there always. As a matter of fact, the wounded ships, there were hospital ships assigned to that. Now they never blacked out at night. They had full lights on and markings on the ship, hospital ship. The Germans, there was supposed to be an agreement that the Germans left those ships alone.
Did you ever see any of those ships over in the Indian Ocean or in the Pacific area? Did you see any of those?
Ships?
Yeah, the hospital ships lighted? Or do you
No, I
remember?
saw them in the Mediterranean.
It was in the Mediterranean. Okay.
I
Yep.
saw them in the Mediterranean, but I did not see any in the Far East anywhere.
So Vern, can you describe your second voyage to Calcutta then?
Yes, we arrived back in where was it? The east coast of Canada, St. John, New Brunswick. That's where we arrived the second time. And we were there for quite a while, and the ship was reloaded again with pretty much the same type of stuff. But what they did is they came aboard and painted us. Now this is, I don't know, we had no word about it, but they painted us in a camouflage painting, and we didn't know where we were going to go. And they kept putting cargo aboard, but these painters swarmed aboard, and had us in a camouflage painting. And I suspect now what they were doing is trying to cover up or trying to confuse the German spies as to just what was going on and getting ready for the D-Day. And
As a
in the
decoy.
end, they repainted us again dark gray and kept putting cargo aboard. And that's what you see in that second cargo. That cargo sheet that I gave you?
Yes.
That's what you see for that second voyage. We didn't even know where it was going until we got ready to go, to leave, and we finally left. And this time, we went across, we went down to Norfolk, Virginia on our own, and then we joined a convoy from there going over to Gibraltar and through the Mediterranean and then up to Bombay, and we arrived in Bombay on D-Day.
And this was the time that you sailed with camouflage paint.
No, it was they
repainted?
They took the camouflage off.
Oh, you never did sail with camouflage?
No, we never sailed with it. They came
They
out
changed
again
their mind.
and painted it the dark gray.
But that's good, because I was going to ask, thanks for asking that, because I was going to ask, do you won't recall what the color of the camouflage was? You probably can't, but do you
Well, it
remember
was
anything?
multicolored, which you often see on a ship, pictures of ships.
Yeah,
Kind of
okay.
beige and gray and so on, a little bit here, a little bit there. That was why it was painted. But then they came over on afterwards and painted it dark gray. But they never changed the cargo. They knew what they were loading all the time, and that's the cargo that you see in that illustration.
It's just they changed the strategy.
Yeah. So I'm only guessing, but I kind of think maybe they were trying to fool somebody.
So in your convoy, when you're from like the Suez Canal or to Calcutta,
Yeah.
was there any incidents on the way over there that you recall?
Well, in the Mediterranean mostly, we had mostly air attack,
Okay.
because the Germans still were in charge of the northern shore of the Mediterranean. And we had mostly air attack there.
Okay.
And that was true going both ways.
Were you ever hit?
So
we had one, I shouldn't say we were never hit. We had an aircraft one time fired at us with their machine guns, and the bridge was like this, and the radio shack was just inside that. That was the side of the radio shack was inside, and there was a stream of bullets hit up there and down there. It didn't do any damage, but they hit, you could tell. We had armor plating about that thick on the outside of the steel. It just blew that off as in a series of shells. That was the nearest we ever got to being hit.
And do you remember this? I've asked you before, but well, just for the camera's sake, did you ever know anybody on other ships that sunk, like the Empress of Asia, or do you know anything about? Were you in that time period when that ship was sunk? Do you know anything about that one? Sunk off Singapore, I believe. Do you know anybody on any of those ships?
Well, you talked about the first Canadian Park ship that was sunk.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that. I was just going to ask, did you know anyone, as a general question, did you have any people that you knew who actually either were survivors or died in any of the merchant marine?
I knew people that had got torpedoed and so on. Yeah,
Okay.
I met them, that's people on the ship.
Yeah. So Vern, I kind of confused you by asking you about the Empress of Asia.
Yeah.
So what I really want to ask you about is the Jasper Park. Could you tell us anything about that?
The Jasper Park was one of the first park ships that was manufactured, and it was turned over to the Park Steamship Company in the fall of '42, and she made a trip to England with a cargo of war material for England, I believe. Then she was loaded with a cargo of war material of some type in England, And then she was coming over to North America and then on through the Panama Canal, just as we did, to get to India. And so the spring, when I first joined the Merchant Navy, they told me at one point to stand by. There was a ship coming in from England that might be short a radio officer, and it was going to be in New York. So stand by to go down to New York. So when I finally got a call, I thought I was going to go to New York, and instead of that, I went aboard the Algonquin Park. But the fact is, they were waiting. They thought they were going to have another radio operator for the Jasper Park, and pick it up in New York, and then go on to India. And of course, she got torpedoed. We went to the same destination, and never had anything happen to us.
Were there any survivors from that
There were
incident?
Yeah, there were. I have no idea how many or how many, but they were picked up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the Jasper Park was on its own when it was torpedoed.
That was a horseshoe in your back pocket.
It sure was. One of the many.
So we moved. I think we got to the. So you're on your second. We're in your second voyage,
Yeah.
and you're at Calcutta, and
Yeah.
now you're going to head back, and you've unloaded your war materials,
Yeah.
and now you're going to head back. And what do you
Yeah.
again? Do you take anything with you?
We
And
brought
what-
some cargo back, but not very much. But we brought some cargo back, and we came back through the Mediterranean again. And in Gibraltar, we were picked up by a convoy with American escorts, and brought. It was destined for New York, and 100 miles or so out of New York, we left the convoy and sailed up to the Canadian ports, and we ended up going to Montreal. And that's after the second trip, the Algonquin Park was pretty well used up and needed an overhaul. So she went into dry dock, and they released all the crew, and then I went to another ship.
How long did each of those loops take you?
Well, the first one took much longer. The first trip took about 7 months. We went 79,779 nautical miles for the round the world trip on that first voyage. But the second voyage was a little faster, maybe 4 or 5 months.
So Vern, earlier you referred to a situation where you came across a lifeboat. I think was it in the Indian Ocean? And could you describe that? It's on your second voyage going back.
Well, we were coming by ourselves across the Indian Ocean. That was I think that was on the second trip, if I remember right. But we saw this lifeboat floating, and we pulled up beside it, and it was full of dead people, and it was a Dutch ship apparently to begin with. And as luck would have it, we didn't have to go down and pick up the people out of the lifeboat, because there was a British destroyer came along, and we signaled the destroyer that just by visual signaling that we had a problem over here. So they came over, and we just carried on. They did what they had to do with the people in the lifeboat.
An ever-present reminder of what your fate could be.
Do you remember whether anybody talked about after that, or asked for a rum ration?
I never
Or
talked to anybody after that at all, except our own people.
Yeah. Okay. So, was there any other? The other thing I was going to ask you was, did you see a difference in the convoy systems, or any differences when you went with that American convoy? Were you with British convoys, or was there differences in how they did things?
I was with British convoys. I was with American convoys. I was with Canadian convoys, and as far as the operation is concerned, there wasn't much difference. No, there wasn't. There was in pre-convoy public meetings, which took place all the time. As when I became chief radio officer, I used to attend those meetings, and of course, all the British convoys were British retired British admirals and rear admirals and so on, and they were quite something. From a personal point of view. Like I was one time I was on a ship that was the Commodore ship. So the first thing that happened, the ship was built in such a way that underneath the bridge was the captain's suite, which was quite a large area. But in behind him was my cabin. I was right up there at the bridge, and I had my own cabin, and my cabin was just behind the captain's cabin. And so I was getting ready. We were getting ready to sail, and they came to me one day and said, "We want you to move to the hospital, the ship's hospital. And your cabin's going to be taken over by the Commodore, because we're going to be a Commodore ship." So the ship's Commodore took over my cabin, and so we had a previous sailing meeting aboard the ship, and as chief radio officer, I inquired as to. He didn't say anything about what we were going to do, but so I said, I asked him what we were going to have. So I thought it was going to be a little bit exciting. We'd have a little more work to do, He says, just you take you and your group just stand your regular watches. I'm bringing in 3 experts. So as it turned out, he brought in 3 Navy radio operators. And so I knew nothing about what was going on up there in my own cabin. So we just stood watch and took the usual messages about convoys all over the place and so on. And I just sent any messages to the captain that happened to be at all interesting or would be in the area that we were in. Never talked to this rear admiral, this retired rear admiral at all. And so we were finally going into that was late in the war, so we were finally going into the Irish Sea. I'll start a little more and tell a little more about it. We went into the Mediterranean. I thought we were going to Italy. We had a wartime
Vern, I'm just going to stop. I'm sorry. So are you on your third? Have you left the Algonquin at this stage?
I had left the Algonquin. I was on the Hampstead Park.
So this is your third voyage.
That was my third voyage.
Yep.
And we went into the Mediterranean, and we suddenly went into Algiers. We were taken out of the convoys and sent into Algiers, and they took all our cargo out. It was all war material. The war is over in North Africa. I don't know why. To this day, I don't know why they took all our cargo off, because I thought the war was still going in Italy, and. So anyway, when we got all our cargo taken off, we were given our sailing orders, and we were to go over to Spain, to Cartagena, and another port there.
Valencia?
Valencia, yeah. And we went in there and picked up into 2 ports. We got about 7,000 tons of oranges. And we had never been carrying anything but war material until then. So got this oranges aboard, and they put a whole bunch of oranges, several crates of oranges on the deck for the crew on a return voyage, so everybody was eating oranges. And we went to Gibraltar, and we got to Gibraltar, and they told us we were going to be the Commodore's ship. So we got this British guy come aboard and took my cabin over, and I told you about going up there. But we were going into the Irish Sea because they had just opened a channel through the Irish Sea. The war was pretty much under control at that time. We left Gibraltar. We only had 12 ships. And we had, from the time we left Gibraltar until we reached the Irish Sea, we had pretty well standard hassle with submarines because we were just off the coast of France. And so it was a continuing battle. They did get 2 ships. And
did you see that, Vern? Did you?
Well, you don't see
hear or you heard or?
No, you see, you know, we knew what was going on, but you don't actually see what very much what was going on. You know, you might go up on the bridge, and if it was during the daylight hours, you might see a ship get torpedoed and the lifeboats coming out and ship picking them up and that sort of thing. But anyway, the convoy never stops. It just keeps going.
Do you remember whether you had any air cover, or did you have what kind of ships? Did you have any corvettes or destroyers or anything with you?
No, today I couldn't tell you.
Okay, no, that's right.
We had a British convoy, and I can't remember what they were. But
So the show just keeps going, regardless of who gets
the convoy
torpedoed.
just keeps going. There are ships at the back that are allocated as rescue ships in the event of anybody being torpedoed. So anyway, we got to the south of the Irish Sea, and I didn't know this before, but apparently the channel had been blocked off for most of the war, and that's why we went around Ireland and come in from the north. So anyway, this channel was through there, and we had some pretty rough weather. And poor visibility and so on, and so the Commodore decided to have the ships remaining and go in single file through this channel that was cleared of mines. And it was kind of funny because suddenly he found out that his so-called experts didn't know anything about direction finders. And of course, as chief radio officer, I was quite familiar with direction finders and so on. So the captain said, well, bring Harvey up here, he'll take you through. So I went on watch about 4 o'clock one afternoon, and I stayed on watch until 7 o'clock the next morning when we got to Liverpool. And so as I came off watch, this pompous old Commodore called me into my cabin, sitting in my chair, and I was standing at attention in front of him. And he congratulated me on bringing the convoy into Liverpool.
Good for you. Could you just explain briefly for people like what a direction, how would you read what a direction finder is?
Direction finder is aboard the ship, and the direction finder will tell you by operating that thing. It tells you exactly where you are. And now the way it does that is that it receives a signal from, say, over here, and another one from over here, and you bring a line this way and this way. And where those lines cross, that's your position. So of course you put that on your chart and you know exactly where you are. And you keep doing that every 15 or 20 minutes to make sure you stay in the channel.
Have you ever wondered why those the Navy guys wouldn't have known that?
I never did wonder.
Well, good for you.
Why bother?
Canada to the rescue once again.
So, did you go on any other voyages, Vern? We've described 3. Were you on any other ones? Or?
Well, after that, there was the Hampstead Park was allocated to the CPR, and the captain was off one of the Empress ships, as a matter of fact. And he was a junior officer, deck officer on one of those large passenger ships. and he was kind of full of himself when he got onto this little ship. And I never had any, you know, it used to be my cabin was so close to the captain's that we used to talk all the time, you know. And so I never talked to him all through that voyage. So at the end of that voyage, when we got, after we left England, we got back to Canada, I left the ship. And I just took a week's holiday and then came back and checked into the manning pool and got onto another small ship, just signed to a small ship. And, you know, it was just sailing down to the West Indies and back and so on, short trips. After that, the war was over after that particular third voyage.